how to create custom reports. Creating custom reports. So how to create custom reports. So custom reports, we touched a little bit in our previous sessions. So each custom report it requires a data source which will source the data for the user. So each data source will have a primary business object, and that business object again in turn relates to multiple child business objects. So in the next slides we'll see how that relationship will be maintained. But at this point, just for our understanding, for creating custom report, we would need a data source, and each data source will be associated with one primary business object, and that primary business object in turn can have relationship with multiple child business objects. So the data source is the starting point, the primary filter for any custom report. So without a data source, we will not be able to create custom report. Okay. So when we talk about data source, there are two types of data sources that Workday offers. One is the standard data source. The other is the indexed data source. So depending on the use case, depending on the requirement, we usually go for standard or indexed. So we'll see what is the difference between standard and indexed data source. But yeah, these are the two different types of data sources that we have in Workday to create custom reports. Right? So now standard data sources. So standard data sources can have, like, for example, for the same business object, there can be different data sources that gives different sets of data. So for example, if you take worker as a data source, so in worker, we have different data sources like all workers, all active and terminated workers, all future hires. So we have different data sources on the same business object. But whereas the indexed data sources, so these are optimized for performance. So whenever we create a custom report that brings a huge amount of data, then indexed data sources are preferred, because these indexed data sources have predefined indexed fields that we can use to filter the data. If we try to use standard data source for the huge volume, since most of the fields are not indexed in standard data source, the report will run very slow and it will impact the performance. So that is the main advantage of using indexed data source versus standard data source. So these are some examples where we typically use indexed data sources, like for example, workers. So if any organization has huge amount of population, then in that case, if we want to report on workers, then we will have to use indexed data source. And same goes for general lines. So general lines, for any company, there can be millions of general lines. So even in that case, preferred data source is indexed data source. So standard data source, we usually use it when we have low volume, more transactional purposes, but indexed data source is mostly used for performance optimization, and where the filters can be applied very minimally so that the data source can pull huge amount of volume. So this is one example that shows the relationship between data source, the primary business object, and the related business object that we spoke about. So here, if you see all active employees, this is one data source. So inside all active employees data source, we have the employee business object, which is the middle layer that you see here. So this employee business object is the primary business object for this data source. So without employee business object, these relationships that you see here on the left and right hand side, these relationships does not exist. So if you see the relationship here, employee business object is the primary business object that has these different list of data or list of fields like the employee last name, hire date, base pay age, so on and so forth. So if you see here, we have the type. Last name, it says text, which is a free text, and hire date, which is a date field, and amount, which is a currency, and age, which is a numeric, and use manager, which is a boolean. And we have few other fields here that says single instance and multi-instance. So we'll talk about what single instance and multi-instance fields are. But typically, for a given business object, it can be an employee or any other business object. These are the different types of fields that you would see for any given business object. One is text fields. There can be n number of text fields. There can be n number of date fields. There can be currency, numeric. There can be boolean. At the same time, there can be single instance and multi-instance fields. So these fields are straightforward: text, data, date, currency, numeric, and boolean. But single instance and multi-instance, for example, if you take here the compensation grade, it is single instance, and the manager, it is single instance. So this means within manager, for example, if I take this manager as the single instance, this manager alone will have these different fields that we can report on. So this manager level 01, this manager level 01, this is an object in itself. That's why we are calling it as single instance. Whereas these other fields, last name, date, age, age manager, these are all not instance fields. These are non-instance fields. We cannot report or extract additional information from these fields. That's why these are not related to any business object. But whereas these fields that are highlighted as single instance and multi-instance, these can have more attributes. Like for example, manager level 01 here, which is a single instance. Here manager level 01 in itself is a business object, which is nothing but a single instance. And that manager level 01 business object in turn will have again some other fields, like the same type of fields what we see in any business. We can have the manager name, hire date, any other information pertaining to the manager. So the relationship between this business object and this business object is the employee is the parent business object, because this is the primary business object for this data source. And inside the parent, we have one single instance that it in itself is a business object, and that has these other fields. So this will become the child, or we can say it as a related business object, because the manager level 01 is related to employee. And if you observe here, within manager level 01, we further have again instance and other type of fields. So compensation grade, again, this is an instance. So this is what you see here, compensation grade business object. So wherever you see an instance, this is related to some other business object, which in turn have multiple type of fields. So when we want to report on employee, we can drill to manager level 1 and get this data. And at the same time, we can drill into compensation grade and get this data. So the point here is, from primary business object, we can drill into related business object and get the data that is available on the related business object and show it as a single set of data for the user in the UI. So these are the left hand side. If you see here, these are showcased as one-to-one mapping because these are single instance, which means for a particular employee business object, for a given employee, there can be only one manager. At the same time, there can be only one compensation grade. That's why the relationship is showing as 1:1 for these two. Whereas if you see for these two, it shows 1:many because these two multi-instance, which means each employee can have multiple dependents and each employee can have multiple languages. So that's the reason these are multi-instance fields. So that's why these are mapped as one-to-many. So for one employee, there can be 5 dependents. The business object will be same, but the number of rows inside this business object that relates to this employee can be many. The same goes for languages business object as well. And there are some filters that we can add on the data source that we will see when we actually create one report in the tenant. But yeah, the data source can be filtered based on whatever the parameters that we need. Okay, moving on to the next slide. So how do we create a custom report? So there is a delivered task that says create custom report that brings the custom report creation screen that looks something like this. We will see that in the tenant. So when we create the custom report, there are some mandatory information that we need to provide. One is the report name, which should be unique. You cannot use any existing report name for the new report. The second is the report type. We'll come to this. So there are different types of reports, but for this training purpose, we'll consider either simple or advanced report type. But just for the sake of knowledge, we have different report types that we'll see some examples in our next slide. And the last option that you see here is the data source, which we have been talking about. So for creating any custom report, we need a data source. So that data source we have to pick up from here. And there is another checkbox called temporary report. So what this does is if you check this temporary report, so this report will stay in the tenant for a certain period of time, 15 days, let's say. So after that date has reached, the report will be auto deleted. Means the report will not be available anymore. So temporary reports we usually create for any debugging or any testing purpose. If you want to move any report to production, then this must be unchecked, because if this is checked, the report gets deleted after a certain number of days. We'll see this in the tenant, how we can create a report. So yeah, this is the same thing that we saw earlier. We need to choose a report type and the data source. And we can, once we select the data source, in the next screen, it will ask for what fields we need to enable on the report. Like for example, if you need the last name, the dependent status, based on that we can select the fields. And then columns we can order based on our need. We'll see that in our demo. And sorting and filtering also, that is something we can do, which we will see that in our next sessions. Okay. So we spoke about different report types. So these are all the different report types that are available in Workday. So as I said, depending on the use case, we can choose different types of reports. In this training purpose, we will mostly go with advanced or simple type of reports, because advanced is the one which we typically use in our integrations. Let's say it can be either EIB or it can be a custom studio integration. And for these two, the supported data source is type is the advanced data source. The other data source types or the report types will not support for integrations. They are simply used only or purely for reporting purposes. But the advanced report type is used for integrations. That is the reason for this training we will talk only about advanced reporting. So this is how each report type would look in Workday once you create it. These are basically the outputs of each of the type of report. For example, if you see here, this is the advanced report, which we will create one and see the data in the tenant as part of our demo. So this is displayed in a tabular format. There are no other custom modifications or graphical changes that we can do for the advanced type. That's why the data, because these advanced reports are used by the backend integrations. That's why these are displayed in the tabular format. The next set of type is the search report. So the search reports are typically for the users who want to search some information in Workday. So for example, find events is one search report, find jobs is the search report that I can show you in the demo. It looks like, but basically it gives the option for the users to filter the data that they need and then see the results on the right hand side. Right. And these other type of report is the matrix report. So this matrix report usually will be used whenever we have to show some summary information like the number of count of the employees in a particular organization or for a group of departments. So this matrix report can summarize that information and provide or represent the data in a pictorial or the graphical format, as you can see here. It can also provide the drill down details for each summarized row. Like, for example, if you have created a matrix report that summarizes or groups the data by different departments, let's say. So for in each department, there can be 100 workers. So you can drill into each department and see who are all those 100 workers are. That's the advantage of using the matrix report. The next set of reports that you see in the bottom are less used ones like the composite, trending, transport, and inbox. So there are some minor differences between these reports versus the other types that we saw. Whereas, for example, if you take composite report, we can assign multiple data sources to it. Yes. Whereas for the advanced or matrix types, as we discussed earlier, we can only have a single data source. So depending on the requirement, we can create either composite report that takes multiple data sources, transpose the report, which can take a single data source but provide the data in a different format than the tabular format or the graphical format. So this is a quick overview of different report types. Again, for our integration purpose, we will focus on the advanced reporting. So creating a custom report requires a data source that we know. So how do you know how to pick up a data source when you are creating a report? So for that, there is a task, there is a delivered report that we will see when we go into the demo, where it shows the list of data sources that are available and its description. So based on that report, we can choose the data source that we need for our use case and then use it while creating the report. And again, as we discussed, this again drives what primary business object that your report runs on based on the selection of the data source. So the data source is the starting filter for your report. If we need any other additional filters, we can add them once we create the report. So we will see how to see these data sources in the tenant and how to create reports as part of our demo. So this is the same screen that we saw. So we will give the report name here, report type, data source. So this data source, once you click on here, it will show you the list of data sources that are available, which we will see in a moment. So again, this is another screenshot of how it looks like. So once you create the report, there will be a columns tab which lists all the columns, and we can add or remove columns, and we can change the sort order, we can change the filtering, and we can change the heading. So we'll see this in our demo just for the sake of understanding. This is how it looks like. So we will quickly go to the tenant. Now we are logged in to the tenant. Now let's create a simple report on, let's say, on the workers. Let's see what information we can pull. And let's say we have a requirement to create a report on the worker that provides some basic demographic information. So let's see how we can create a report. So before creating a report, as I said, we need to find out a data source. Now, how do we find out a data source? Like I was mentioning, we have a Workday delivered report called data sources report. Just type in the data source, or you can type in and press enter as part of the usual search. Then you will see this report called data sources. Once you click on it, it will show up list of data sources that are delivered by Workday. So these are all, if you see, 2,900 data sources are available in the tenant. So now for your reporting, out of these 2,900, you have to pick one data source, which is a challenging task, right? So how do you pick the data source? So now in our use case, like we were discussing, we need to pull the data for worker demographic information. So now what I'll do here in the data source, once you click on the heading, it will open up this little pop-up that it will ask you to search or filter for any data source. So I'll click on here and let's say I'll search worker and press enter. So once I typed worker and pressed enter, so I got 161 results. So which means on the worker we have 161 data sources. So here itself we have reduced from 2,900 to 161. Now from this 161, we need to drill down to our data source. How do we do that? So what you can do one way is, based on the description, you can select which data source that you want to use for. For example, I want to see what this data source is. I want to see what this data source is so that I can make a choice which one I need to use. So I've selected this one, I've selected this one, and I'm also selecting a few other. Like for example, all active and terminated workers, all workers, right? So let me select these. I don't, since I know about all these data sources, I'm not picking. But ideally, if you want to explore, like for example, this one is indexed. We spoke about it a little while ago. One of the type of data sources. This is also a worker. So let me select this and see what it gives. So you can select any number here and then click on filter. It will filter whatever the data sources that you have selected. Okay. So here if you see, this is the data source and this is the primary business object for this data source. And if you see in the third column, this is the description that provides or that tells us what this data source is all about. Right? So once you go through this description, once you read through it, then you will understand what this data source will bring up. Based on that, you need to determine which data source will be suitable for you. So first level check should be on the description of the data source. Once you understand the description about this data source, what it brings up, then you can decide to go with the data source. Like, for example, this data source, active and terminated workers. So this data source will bring all active employees in Workday along with any terminated workers as well that were terminated. So if our requirement is to create any report to bring up the terminated population as well, then this would be our data source to choose. Let's talk about this one. You can read through this description and just pause for a minute or so. So you might have observed one thing. This primary business object, this data source is also work, and the primary business object for this data source is also worker. But the way it brings up the data is different. Here we saw this data source will bring active as well as terminated population, whereas this it brings up active, it brings up terminated, and if you see here, it also brings up any workers who are going to be hired in the future. We call them as future hires. But whereas this data source will not bring up the future hires. So this is how you would make a call, like in your requirement. If you need future hires, then you should go for this data source. After going through the description. If you do not need future hires, if you only need active and terminated population, you can go with this data source. Or let's say if you use there is one more data source that brings up only active population. If you do not want terminated population, you can go with that data source. And the other one is the indexed data source. So for indexed data source also, all workers, the primary business object is worker. But the difference, as I was mentioning earlier, this indexed data source, there are predefined fields that are indexed and they are efficient for searching and producing large amount of records. So if your requirement has thousands of records that you need to populate on the report, then the suggested way or the recommended way is to choose indexed all workers data source. Here you see the data source type, it shows as indexed. And if you see some other column here, it shows some additional information. I can quickly explain these. So this one talks about built-in prompts. So built-in prompts, something that will act as additional parameter, additional search criteria for your report. So as an example, for example, let's pick up this one, all active and terminated workers. So by default, this data source will bring all active as well as terminated populations. Here we do not have any built-in prompts, but if we are about to have any built-in prompts here, let's say a built-in prompt for active employees, then while creating the report, if we enable that built-in prompt filter, what happens is even though your data source says to pull all active as well as terminated workers, since you are restricting in the prompt level saying that you only need active, then automatically the terminated population will be skipped from the report and only active population will be displayed. So basically, the data source will act as a primary level filter, and within that, inside that, if we want to further drill down or further filter, add our own custom level of filters, then that would go under built-in prompts. Okay, and there is also a third level of filter that I can show you when we create the report. Okay. And then the next you see here, permitted security groups. So which means when you create a report, you should have access to these security groups in order to create the report. For example, if you want to create a report on this data source, you should be a member of either of these. And then there are some other filters here. We will go to through them in detail. Like these are the next level of filters. We spoke about data source filter. We spoke about relational business object filters, data source filters, built-in prompts. So these are again further level of refinement for the already filtered data. Like I was talking about the third level, fourth level of filters. When we go down, we can use furthermore refined filtering to filter out the population and give the data only that is needed. Okay. So this is about the data sources. So now what I will do, let's create a simple custom report. Now for creating a custom report, as we were discussing, we have a delivered task called create custom report. So let me type in create custom report. As soon as I type, as you see here, I did not type the exact full name. I just typed create CUS, which means the starting letter of the custom report, and it gave the search. So let me click on that, and then it takes us to the screen that we saw in our slides. So the first one should be report name, which should be unique. So for the demonstration purpose, what we will do, we will create one test name u underscore report simple. So this is one naming convention that I just gave, but we can give any free text. And then you see the report type. This is what we were discussing, different types of reports. So first we'll talk about simple report, and then we'll move on to the advanced report. So I'll select simple here, and if you see here, it shows what each report type does. So you can go through this help text so that you can get some idea on which report type that you need to select. Okay. And then you have the data source. So the data source, you see, there are two options here. One says optimized for performance, and the other one is data source. So what this means is this is the indicator for indexed data source. So if you select this checkbox, then you will be only able to select indexed data sources. You will not be able to select other data sources. If you uncheck, then you will be able to select any data source that you want. So for the demonstration purpose, let's say I've unchecked it. Okay. And in the data source, I can select. So once you click on this, it will open up the search window. If you see here, there are some pre-populated suggestions that Workday is giving us. So either you can click on them, you can go here and search active worker. It brings up different data sources, and you can pick one of them. So in our case, we picked all active and terminated workers. So you notice in our slides, we saw a few other options that we had got here, like the temporary report, web service enabled. Those did not appear because we have selected the report type as simple. So for simple report, those options will not be available. When we change or when we create advanced report, those options will be available. So we selected the data source. Let me click on OK. So once you click on OK, this is the edit screen where you can further add more details to the report. On the right hand side, you can see here, if you need, you can create any report tags so that later if you want to group, let's say you create 10 reports and you want to group it under benefits. Maybe you have hundreds of reports that you created for your test purpose. You can create one tag called test and assign your report to the tag so that it is easy for you to search for this report when you log in frequently. So without searching for the report, you can just select the tag name and it displays all the reports that are associated with the tag. So for demonstration purpose, I'm not adding anything. I can leave it blank. You can see here, this is some additional information. This again shows the same description that you typically see in the data sources report. And then if you want to add any comments or description on what this report will bring up, you can provide some text comments. Like, for example, I'll say, this custom report will populate demographic details of employees. You can minimize this, and here you see you have different tabs here. The first tab is the columns tab. So in the columns tab, you have a field. So this is where you will select the fields. For example, what I will do, let's say I will select first name of the worker. I need a first name. I got the first name. I can select, and here you can also provide any label that you want to see. We'll come to the label format options later, but for the time being, and just focus on the different types of data that you can add onto your report. So here we added first name. Let me add do plus row. Let me add last name. So that like this, we can add in number of filters. Like I can add employee ID. I can add where this person is located, so on and so forth. Once you add, you can remove it by using this icon, or you can add further rows by using this icon, this symbol. And you can also arrange these fields. Okay. So I'll just click on OK. I'll just save this for now. I've not added any other details. I've just created one simple report and I have added this data. This is the demographic information that I need, and that's all. Our report is created. Okay. So you see here, temporary report. This is what we were talking about. So this is a temporary report definition that will be deleted 1 hour after 11:23. So this is available only for 1 week. Okay. Because this is a simple. Now here you see, once you create, you have different options here, run, test, and done. Once you click on done, it will navigate away from the screen and the report will be saved. If you want to test for the first time with a limited amount of data, then you can click on test report. Once you click on test, this is how the data gets displayed. And so these are all the fields or the data that we have added in our report that we wanted to see. And you see some options here. If you want, you can export this data to Excel. You can even export it to worksheets. And the other good part is you will also be able to filter on this data. For example, if I want to filter on location and I'll say Melbourne, I only want to see Melbourne employees. Click on filter. So that list will bring up this data filtered by the location. If you want to remove the filter, you can click on it and say remove filter. Right. So this is one simple custom report that we have created now. And so you were seeing earlier, we had different options, run and test and done. So when you click on run, it actually runs for the entire population in your company. Right? If you click on test, it will only search and brings down only the first 10 rows of data, so that once the 10 rows of data looks clean, we can run the report for full volume. Let's move on to the next module, how to edit the custom report once you created it. So in our case, we have created our report. We know the report is saved. Now, how do I go back and modify my report for editing the custom reports? Okay, so we'll see how to edit the custom reports. So once you have created your report in the tenant, let's say you logged into your home page, you are here and you don't know how to look for your reports. Okay. So there are two ways that you can look for your report. So you can say either view custom report. This is one task wherein you can see all the different reports that are created in the tenant. See here, you can filter by different filter options here. Like we were discussing, one of the option is report tag. So if you have added the report tag for your report, you can select what the tag is, and then the custom reports will be displayed based on the tag. Since we have not added any tag, so we cannot filter by this option. What I will do is, this is the first option that we have called My Reports. So I'll click on My Reports. It will bring up, these are the list of reports that I have created. And if you see, this is one report that we created just now. So I'll select this report and then say OK. Server error, interesting. See, let me refresh, review custom report, monitor, of this, go to my reports, select this, and then say OK. Right. So this is our report, which is the same definition that we created earlier. Now, if you want to edit this, you can go to related action. These are three dots. Wherever you see the three dots in Workday, these are related actions. You can go to custom report, click on edit. So once you edit, click on edit, it brings you to the same screen like what you would have seen in the create custom report when you were creating for the first time. And now let's say I want to move this employee ID to the first place. Right now I can use this arrows to move this employee ID to the first place. And then I need first name, last name, and location. And I want to add, let's say, a few other information. Employee's hire date. Okay. I added hire date. And I also want to add, let's say, the job title of the employee. So let me add the job title. And then let me save it. Okay. So for the testing purpose, we can, again, if you want to test with limited data, you can use test. If you want to see full data, you can even run the report. Now, since this tenant has only 600 employees, it ran pretty quick and it gave all the 600 employees data. But ideally, if the count is more, the recommended approach is to test your report first and see if the data is coming as expected, and then you can do the full run. So employee ID moved to the first column. We have the hire date and job title. And this looks pretty good. Okay. Now, let's say if you want to add further details to the report, further configuration. Before that, I'll show one more way to edit the report. So without navigating to view custom report, we can simply type edit custom report. This is one other task where you can search for your reports in a similar way that you do with view custom report. Instead, once you click on OK via this edit custom report task, it directly takes you to the edit screen. So you no need to click on the related actions, go to the custom report and click on edit. Rather, it directly takes you or redirects you to the edit screen. That is the only difference. Right? So this is how you would edit the custom report. Let me cancel. And I was also talking about some different types of reports. Right? We'll not go into detail for each of the type. I know like we created this as a simple type. So let me show you one example of search report. So you see So find jobs. So this is one search report that you can use. So wherein it gives the list of data, and on the left hand side you have different filters to filter the data and see only the data that you need. You observe these are not in the tabular format because these are different types of reports. These are not simple or advanced report. So again, we'll not worry much about this, but for our discussion purpose, we will see only the simple and advanced type. Let me go back to the home screen. All right. So now we understood how we can edit the fields. Now we will also see how we can edit the data source of the report once we have created it. So what I'll do, let's go to the same task called edit custom report, and I'll go to, so you can also, if you remember your report name every time, you can put in your report name either full or partial. So it has such capability that will bring up your report. And if you see here, we do have an option to change the data source. So this was the initial data source that we picked, but now it is allowing us to change the data source. But if you observe here, it is not allowing us to change the primary business object, which means once you create a data source, you can change the data source, but not the primary business object. This is an important note to remember, right? So let's see how we can change the data source. Now here, once you click on this drop down, you will see all these data sources. But one thing if you notice, if you pick any data source on their description, right? Once you click on these three dots, we call them as related actions. The screen will be expanded wherein you will be able to see what is the primary business object for this data source and what is the data source type and what are the additional prompts filters that we have and all this sort of information. So if you see here, whatever the data source that you pick, the primary business object will be worker. Only the description or the result from the data source will be different. So which means once you have created your report on the worker data source, even if you want to change the data source, you can, but the new data source should also be on the worker business object. You will not be able to select any other business object which is not on worker, because all these fields that you are seeing here, these are linked to the primary business object. If you change the data source, if you have an option to change the business object as well, then these fields doesn't make sense here. That's the reason, since these fields are tightly associated with this business object, we will not be able to change the business object itself. Rather, we have the option to change the data source on the same business object and filter out the data accordingly. Like for example, here, let's say instead of all active and terminated workers, now I need future hires as well. Then I'll go for all workers data source. You can read through the description, which already saw, and I know this will bring the future hires. So I have selected the data source. Now, as soon as I selected the data source, nothing got changed. This remains same, fields remain same. And there is a little pop-up that we got saying that clearing this checkbox enables you to select a non-indexed data source, which might cause you to report run slow. This is what when we were talking about the standard versus indexed types. But nevertheless, this is just an alert for your information. So now we have changed the data source and I'll click on OK. That's all. Your data source got changed.